I'm Joel Meskin, Managing Director of Community Association Products at McGowan Program Administrators. I've insured well over 100,000 community associations throughout the United States and have probably insured closer to 200,000. I have the designation of Community Insurance Risk Management Specialist by the Community Association Institute. I am a fellow of the College of Community Association Lawyers. I have a management liability insurance specialist designation by the Insurance International Risk Management Society. I am also an educated business partner with Community Association Institute. As many of you have either received this question or are asking this question, is whether or not to open your various community association common amenities such as pools, community fitness centers, community clubhouses, tot lots, and other similar communal amenities. This is the bottom line. Just say no to opening any of these at this time. That's what we're going to talk about here, and there's a very clear and simple reason why you shouldn't in the context of a community association, whether that be a condo, single-family homeowners association, a property owners association, a cooperative housing association, or in many cases, which is even a bigger issue, is timeshare associations. So we just say no. We could end it here if nobody really was interested in knowing why and just want to get somebody who has been around for quite a while. Just say no. I put this here that keep calm and earn your bragging rights, because the question I'm getting either from community association managers or from members of boards of directors or trustees is they're getting these questions every day, every hour from various community members. A lot of them say, well, what are we paying our community assessments for? A lot of them say, this is the reason I moved here. What you have to understand, and most of you probably do when you sit down, is this is not your typical situation. This is not a normal time. We're in new charted waters, and we have to look at this a little differently. But in order to understand this, we have to go through a couple of steps that will help hopefully clear this up for all of you as to why you should keep these amenities closed at this time. The volunteer board members, which many of you are, is responsible to protect, preserve, and enhance the association's assets. End of story. That's what your role and position in a board of directors for a community association institute is. A lot of people turn the role into things that it really isn't, take on responsibilities that really aren't necessary, and probably can very often be disheartening or create other issues that should not be created. So at the bottom line, why should the board close or keep closed our common amenities such as pools, fitness, rooms, and clubhouses? It's very simple, because the most important risk management tool in a board's toolbox is do not assume liabilities that the association is not required to assume. Right now, when we're looking at opening various common amenities or closing for those that hadn't closed them when they were directed to, and members start saying, hey, why are our common amenities open? Because by keeping them open, you're assuming liabilities that do not exist. People don't really necessarily always think that through. In my world, as I indicated, the number of claims I've touched, which is between 6,000 and 7,000 D&O claims, familiar with probably just as many general liability claims, umbrella liability claims, but the two real key things here are the directors and officers liability insurance and the general liability insurance. So we go back to Nancy Reagan and we basically say, just say no to opening our common elements. How does the association pay to protect association assets? Remember, this is the board's basic requirement to protect, preserve, and enhance the assets of the association. So what we have to look at is, how do we currently fund it? What is our goal on how we should fund it? And I put these two graphs here, these two pie charts, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm very much more capable of understanding things when it's put into a visual. So the most common funding method, as we've seen, is demonstrated by the pie chart on the left. This shows that really the single biggest is self-insured. Okay, the next is unexpected perils. And what do we do there? We cover that by insurance. And what we try to do for unexpected perils, these are accidents, these are fires, these are things that we aren't expecting. These are, could be claims against the directors and officers. It could be somebody falling off a balcony and saying that it was the fault of the association, and very many other things. And then we have the other portion, which is wear and tear. This is why we have reserve funds or capital improvement funds. These are things that can't be insured because we know it's going to happen. We know the roof is going to fail. We know that the plumbing is going to get old. We know electrical will have issues. We know that the driveways will have issues. So how do we pay for those assets to be maintained? We do it by funding reserve studies. In most cases, associations really, they're budget-driven entities, and the key is we don't want to have surprises. That is why we do reserve studies in the first place, rather than having a single ginormous situation where we have a special assessment or have to take out a loan. We want to be able to do this, over time. $100 a month feels a lot better. It's sort of like having money taken out of your bank account and going into your 401k or some other retirement fund. It's a lot easier to do it that way. So when the time comes, you basically say, oh, it's going to cost us $50,000 to fix these roofs on these buildings. You've got the money. It's right there. You may have to add a little bit here, a little bit there, but at the end of the day, you've got the money. With the unexpected perils, the insurance, this is why what we try to do is help people understand why they really have to look at the available coverage as opposed to the point of sale insurance premium. There's nowhere in any governing document, any statute that I'm aware of, and I've insured, as you know, many associations, where it says that the board is required to save money. That's not your job. Your job is to basically protect, preserve, and enhance the association's assets. So the more, and this comes into the same thing as with properly funding our reserve funds, is to buy the best available insurance that the association can have. We get calls, and you may understand it, from people who, 100 unit association, where they say, God, our D&O went up $100 this year. We better shop it. You have $100 and you have 100 units, that's $1 per unit per year. Shouldn't even be a discussion, as long as your community association insurance professional is providing you with the best available coverage for your specific needs. Okay, So what happens if it's not covered under the unexpected perils, or if it's not covered under wear and tear? Then it's self-insured. As you see in the left-hand side, this is what we see more often than not, is there's a lot more self-insured than we would ever hope or recommend. And how do we fund self-insured? Because whether you're paying under your wear and tear with funding the reserve studies, or whether you're paying by insurance, if you don't have it covered under there, you're going to have to pay out of dues and assessments, probably which were not within your budget. Operating funds, reserves may have limitations, which could create another issue for you. Take out loans. I think loans are becoming the new reserve funding mechanism. A lot of people say, well, we'll wait till it happens and we'll take out a loan. Again, that creates an unexpected amount. It doesn't allow the individual unit members to be able to properly set their own budgets and to have expectations. They're going to get a surprise. And then finally, we have special assessments, which I know nobody listening minds, especially the management companies who say, God, I get to tell them that they have to do a special assessment, $5,000 for each unit owner. Or I had one where it was $184,000 for a unit because they didn't properly reserve. They had a very old building. They had to replace the entire HVAC system. It was covered in asbestos, which added a lot. And they didn't fund their reserves. And so the good news is it's covered because it's covered through these self-insured funding mechanisms. What we try to help people understand from a risk management standpoint is the right-hand side pie, okay? You want to have the best available insurance. Again, you want the community association risk management specialist to present to you the best coverage that you can get. And what I always recommend to people, and they think I'm out of my head, is when you have the insurance professional or various professionals, if you're going to bring in 2 or 3, is when they come in that they should give you the proposal without the cost in the packet. You should have them say, keep the cost in your briefcase. We want each individual insurance professional that sit in front of us, we want them to explain why this is the best risk management product for us. And after each is done, we'll decide which one we want. Then we can bring out the price, because if we look at the price before we listen, we're not going to hear anything that anybody says. Then we have the wear and tear. First of all, you definitely should have a reserve study. They're really worth their weight in gold, and especially you should make sure that you're using a very good and reputable reserve study. And reserve studies really are now, we're currently investigating in one of our, I'm going to be doing a seminar on this in a few weeks, but under the Foundation for Community Association Research Task Force, we did one on aging infrastructures. The reserve study is going to tell you what they see, what they can expect, but there are sometimes surprises underneath. And sometimes you have to also add a certain amount in your reserve funding that's going to cover those type of potential surprises. So this is what we're aiming for. Again, why do we do this? We're doing this because the board has one primary obligation: to protect the assets of the association. Then they delegate how that is to be accomplished. If you have an independent management company, you're going to delegate probably 98% of that to them. You may delegate others to various insurance professionals, such as an attorney, who's going to make sure that your governing documents are accurate, and so forth. We're not going to get any deeper into this right now, but our next issue is everybody's asking, we're making a decision to open or close the association's pool or other element. When I refer to pools, I'm really referring to any of the common elements that may be in question, because it's really fairly similar for all of them. Directors and officers liability insurance does not provide defense or indemnity for claims resulting from the COVID-19 virus. Just doesn't. And so people want to know, well, why doesn't it? Why did we buy the directors and officers liability insurance? Well, I can tell you the millions of dollars we spend every year in defending directors and officers, that there are a lot of reasons that you do it, and that's also another seminar. But why in this case? Because the D&O policy, yeah, there may be a claim that the board of directors shouldn't open it or should open it. There may be properly noticed to the carrier that there was a claim, and it's, the boards or the insureds. However, after you get past those items, we have what we call an absolute bodily injury exclusion. And I broke this out here because it helps people understand, well, exclusions, don't we still have they have a duty to defend us? Well, no, and they don't, because of the absolute bodily injury exclusion. This is the type of exclusion that almost all of us have at this stage. And those few carriers who don't have a lot of other deficiencies that really may not provide coverage in any event. So this is what the insuring agreement, which is the first part of every policy out there has an insuring agreement. Then they have definitions, as here we have bolded items that are defined. Then we have exclusions, we have conditions, and then we have endorsements. Here we're going to look at the insuring agreement, because we really don't have to go much further than the insuring agreement and then the bodily injury exclusion. So here, the company shall not be liable for, this is an exclusion, loss, which includes defense fees and costs, on account of any claim, which is a demand against the association, where all or part of the claim is directly or indirectly based upon, arising from, in consequence of, or in any manner related to any bodily injury, sickness, disease, or death of any person, here resulting from COVID-19. I cannot think of any claim that is not going to fall within this exclusion. And if you do, it's not going to be something that you're going to be able to get a carrier to be convinced of without going into pretty significant litigation. There are going to be a lot of attorneys out there, who always are, who say, no, we think that we can pound it into them. This is different than a lot of the other claims that we've seen over the years, because we're talking about trillions of dollars that are at risk here. Carriers are not going to open the door on one and open the floodgates to claims where they really never had an intention to provide coverage for that. The underwriters, I'm an underwriter, and we never contemplated this. And in a lot of cases where you don't complicate it, carriers and individuals would say, well, it is vague and ambiguous as it's defined. Here, this is not vague and ambiguous. This is pretty darn clear. So we're not going to have written demands for bodily injury or death, and we're not going to have coverage for closing the pool or opening the pool. And that's because those are all going to be involved directly or indirectly based upon, arising from, in consequence of, or related in any manner to bodily injury, sickness, disease, death related to the COVID-19. If anybody has any other things that they could think of, I would love to hear from you. You can find my phone number many places. So let me know if you have it, because I would love to help people find coverage under D&O policies. Then we have, and we're really in this presentation only dealing with directors and officers liability, general liability, and we're going to be dealing a little bit with workers' compensation, because those are all very close to the community associations. So in the general liability, that coverage is really dovetailed with the D&O. What isn't covered in the D&O is contemplated to be covered in the general liability. So in the insuring agreement here, whereas we said that they'll pay for a claim, arising from a wrongful act, here they'll pay those sums that the insured becomes legally obligated to pay as damages because of bodily injury or property damage. Okay, we definitely are going to have bodily injury or property damage. That's what the result of the COVID-19 is. In most cases, it's bodily injury, sickness, or death. That's not a question. The property damage, I think it's too attenuated that it's not going to be covered. And under the property policy, which is not going to be covered in this presentation, it wouldn't be covered in any event. And anybody who's interested in that could look at one of my other seminars. The other thing, even if it did, here we said it is bodily injury. However, the bodily injury has to result in all these policies by an occurrence. Occurrence is generally defined as, here, an accident including continuous or repeated exposure to substantially the same harmful conditions. So the question we have here is, are the allegations of people contracting COVID-19 an occurrence or accident? I'm of the opinion that it really is not, and especially under the situation with whether you should open or not open. We had that question because of one reason. We want to prevent people from being exposed to the COVID-19 virus. If we open the pool, we know that that is the risk. It's not going to be an accident if somebody basically contracts the COVID-19 virus. Similarly, if we close it, nobody's going to be able to contract it, so there won't be an issue in that situation. And then we have exclusions. This is more rare than not, the communicable disease exclusion. We don't have it on any of our D&O policies because we don't need it, because we have the absolute bodily injury property damage exclusion, which includes in its definition disease and sickness. Here, you don't know. You're going to have to check with the policy. It's not generally in most policies for community association common interest developments, but you should check. And I imagine most of your agents have been checking as well. But the bigger one is similar to what we just talked about with the occurrence. Most of the general liability policies have an expected or intended exclusion. Basically, we're saying in such a case, an insurer might reference the GL policy exclusion for injury expected or intended from the standpoint of the insured. Insurers, however, typically have a high factual burden to meet in order to successfully apply this exclusion. I think in this case, that is going to be easily met, and that's going to be easily met based on what we talked about earlier. They know that that is the reason that they would close it in the first place. And if they opened it, they know why people are saying you shouldn't open it, because that is what's going to happen. And so I don't think that the D&O is going to provide coverage, and I don't think that the general liability is going to provide coverage. So why am I putting out these two policies? These are the two major potential policies that fall into the pie chart above for unexpected perils. Here, it's not going to be covered under either, because number one, in the general liability, it is going to be expected or intended. And under the D&O, we've got the bodily injury exclusion. So hopefully this gives you an idea of why carriers are going to do this. And if there's no potential coverage, then there's not a duty to defend. You have to have some indication, no matter how little, that there is a possibility that they're going to have to pay indemnification. That isn't an issue in the D&O policy because we provide coverage for non-monetary claims. What liabilities, governmental orders, or decisions may impact the association assets? Remember, we're going through this exercise because why are we opening or closing the pools or the other common elements? Well, if we don't keep them closed, then we being the board and the association, are putting the associations at risk. It's going to be at risk because there is an insurance coverage to provide for that. It's at risk because they will ultimately have to pay out of pocket. If the association as a whole feels comfortable paying out of pocket, I think that is going to be a bad decision, but I think it's probably within their contemplation. So the next question that we're getting is, because in a lot of states, we have governors, county health officials, and they're all saying, okay, you can go back and open certain amenities, you can start doing such and such. However, you have to comply with certain restrictions and you have to take certain precautions. So we have to look at some of those and why we wouldn't want this to happen. So the association assets are at risk because, as we said, the general liability policy provides coverage due to allegations involving damage arising from COVID-19 is not going to be covered. Same thing with the directors and officers' liability. It's not going to be covered. An executive order does not give the board of directors, or the CAM immunity for opening the pools based on the order. It is not a get out of jail free card. The order does not usurp local provisions in addition, and you're going to still fully be able to be sued. That is not going to be a defense. It may help go to reasonableness, but at the end of the day, that isn't going to be an issue until you're in litigation. And that isn't going to be an issue in litigation unless you can pay for that litigation. So that's going to either come out of your various existing monies, or you're going to have to do a special assessment to help fund those actions where you're being sued. And another issue comes up with, who are the most likely people that are going to bring actions against the board or the association? It's unit owners. In this case, since there isn't going to be any coverage, the unit owners, like every other, the unit owners bringing the claim, just like every other unit owner, are going to be the ones who have to fund this out of their own pockets in the method of special assessments. Associations are at risk because if the decision to open is challenged, again, there's no coverage under the D&O. If they keep it closed, there's very minimal exposure. People sue for anything, we understand that. But what people need to understand is, if we're watching CNN, if we're watching Fox News, if we're watching C-SPAN, we're watching any of these talking heads, listening on the radios, the one thing that is certain is that none of this is certain. We can't rely on one. We're not experts. The CAMs aren't experts. The members aren't experts. Even if they work for the health department, they're not experts that you can rely on because you're still going to get sued, and they're not going to, they have no obligation to be giving you this advice one way or the other. So you're really going to have minimal exposure. If you go into court and say, we're demanding that the board do an order to open the pool, the court's going to look at you and say, they're protected by the business judgment defense. They've decided, they've looked at this rule. They're not going against any absolute rules. They're listening to as many people as possible. They're listening to their attorneys. They're listening to their insurance professionals. And there's no way that we're going to overturn or place our judgment with their judgment under these circumstances. It's just not going to happen. If it does happen, you can tell me, I told you so. I'll buy you lunch, I'll buy you dinner, I'll buy you a drink. It's just not going to happen. The association assets are at risk because there's probably no coverage for the CAMs under the workers' compensation policy if the CAM, the community association manager, becomes sick or dies due to exposure to COVID-19. You should check and determine if the association's agreement with the management company requires them to indemnify the company if the company employee becomes injured from the COVID-19. Because if they're working on your behalf and you're requiring that they be put in a position where they are going to have exposure, the good chance is that they will not be covered by workers' compensation, because workers' compensation does not provide exposure to individuals who are exposed to something that is not necessarily unique to their employment, but that everybody else is subject to this as well. And that's the case. There is an exception, and I think this is going to be successful for healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, first responders, hospital employees, because they're being put in a situation where, due to their employment, they're being required to have exposure significantly greater than the general public. I think that's going to be a winner, and I think that's scaring workers' comp carriers to death at this point. Not to make a pun in a sad situation. I think there is an argument, and if I'm a CEO or a executive of a management company, that if that happens with one of their employees, that they should make a claim, because their employee may be considered an essential employee working at the association. They may need to have the community association managers monitoring the elevators as people go in, entries and exits to make sure that they're staying clean and such. Like when you go into the supermarket and they have an employee there wiping down every cart. You know, certain things are giving them increased exposure. So that's something to keep in mind. The association is also at risk because if they allow the pool to open, who is going to enforce compliance? This creates a whole new set of issues for the association. Is the association going to hire third parties who are specialists in this type of cleaning, that are specialists in taking temperatures? I know it's an innocuous thing, but people are still going to complain. What are they going to do if there's a 50% capacity when they're only allowed to have 25% capacity at the pool? What if they don't do social distancing? You know, how are they going to determine who gets to come into the pool and at what times? You know, is there a reservation? You know, so what we're going to be getting is, if we have volunteer board members or other volunteers enforcing this, people are going to assume, they're going to assume for discrimination because they're letting Bob in, but they're not letting Daryl in, or his brother Daryl. So you have to really think about, is it worth it? Because again, we look back, you know, a lot of the issues with claims against these individual volunteers, if somebody gets sick, they're going to attempt to do it under the general liability policy. If somebody gets is making rude remarks and discriminatory remarks, somebody's harassing people, getting into fisticuffs, you know, these are things that there may not be coverage under, clearly under the D&O policy. However, under the general liability policy, there may be some potential coverage in this instance, where the questions are invasions of right of privacy. There are questions about defamation, libel, slander. If somebody puts in the newsletter that Selma in 3B has the COVID-19 virus and she's thin-skinned and she doesn't have it, she stays in because she's following the orders beyond and above. So those are issues that there may be some coverage, but those are the ones that I'm not necessarily worried about at this time. The ones that are worried about that are going to cause and have a major impact on the association's assets are those that we've talked about. We have takeaways, and these are ones that you should really think about. The coronavirus pandemic is new and has caught everybody by surprise. We are all treading new waters. Be careful not to let the dog wag the tail. In other words, the need and desire to open the pool should not really impact the effect that it will have on assets. It just is not worth it at this time for boards. Again, if you refuse to open it and somebody brings an action, there's not going to be coverage, and they're going to have to participate in a special assessment to defend the board. It really is silly at this time. 2-3 months, it's going to be different. It may be different in 2 weeks. We may have a consensus of all the healthcare providers saying, you know what, it's okay to do these things. There isn't any exposure, and you have a minimal necessity to do what you're doing. The other is the board's duty to protect, preserve, and enhance the community association's assets. That's what the board does. If they don't protect this, they're at much greater risk than if they do protect it. Keeping these closed is going to keep them in a very much stronger position than if they open them. The board is the risk manager with the assistance of counsel from CAMs and business partners and experts, such as their attorneys. If you have any attorneys who are really not taking into consideration these assets when they're saying, yeah, the county has said it's okay, the state has said it's okay, as long as you comply with those things, the bottom line is that's not going to stop litigation. It's not going to stop people's complaining. And if somebody, even though it may be a very hard case for the injured individuals to sue, at the end of the day, they're going to still sue, and you're still going to have to defend, and you're going to be self-insured in those situations because there's no insurance coverage. Then you have to look at not everything is insured or insurable. That's what we've gone through here. We've got exclusions. We've got definitions that they're not going to meet. And you have to really know, if we were insured for any of these, even though I don't think it's necessarily the best step from a morality standpoint, because you really don't want people to be injured, and you and I do not know what the true exposure is going to be. The pool water itself, general consensus is that's probably not going to be an issue. The issue is the social gathering. The issue is who's going to monitor, compliance. Those are the real issues. Not all insurance covers all exposures in the community association. Those are things you got to keep in mind. Most alleged damages as a result of the coronavirus are just not covered by insurance. So you have to plan accordingly. I think there are a lot of people who boldly assert and plausibly argue that, their rights are being violated because it's not being opened. Can they stop paying assessments? It's not like you belong to a swim club. You belong to an association. You're an owner. You have an undivided interest in the common interests of the association. Just because you can't use the pool, just because you can't go into the clubhouse, doesn't give you any reason to be entitled to not paying assessments. There are other issues with flexibility that boards may have with respect to payment and providing some form of payment plans that may come into play. That's a different issue. Here, do we open the pools or do we not open the pools? And at the end of the day, I just say no. Any questions? Obviously, this is being pre-taped. I love this picture. This is a lot of information. I'm exhausted. Thankfully, we have so many business partners, professionals to help us. That's what the boards do. That's why people are asking me to do these type of presentations, webinars, seminars, to help them understand and take the position that they should, that is in the best interest of the association, which helps them protect the assets of the association. If anybody has questions, just call me at the number below. It's at the top as well, along with my email address, and I will respond to you as soon as reasonably possible. I hope you and your family stay safe. I hope you don't take risks that you shouldn't be taking. And I hope that this has been helpful. Thank you.